Hello, Year 11. It's Mrs. Crowhurst here for our next lesson on creative writing in Year 11. Can you please start by completing the Do It Now? Reading the paragraph here on the slide and thinking about what is effective about this paragraph and try and list at least 5 things that are effective about it. When you're looking for effective things that the writers used here, think about devices that they've used, powerful words that they've chosen, the way they've structured their sentences, and the punctuation that they have used. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that. Okay, so if you still are taking the time to look at this and do your list, just pause the video. So some things that I found that are effective in this paragraph are first of all the fact that it uses a wide range of devices. So personification is used really well to say that the window glared down at the street, blaming the world, making the window at the top of this house and whatever image is being described seem quite angry and giving it a personality. They also use more personification by saying that it's waiting for the perfect moment to break away from its chains, implying that it's some kind of imprisoned, tortured soul. The writer also uses metaphors like decaying prison, even though maybe it's just a house that's being described. So the devices are very effective. Words like fragile, desperately, murky, reluctantly, there's so many different powerful vocabulary words that are chosen to really make this scene come to life. In terms of sentence structure, which is what we're going to be focusing on today, they don't start all of their sentences with the. Some of them do, because as a writer you have to use the sometimes, or it, but they do start their sentences in different ways. So here we have surrounded by, and then we also have some complex sentences here that use punctuation marks like semicolons and colons and include repetition. And then finally at the end they vary their sentences because you have quite a few complex long sentences here at the start, and then at the end here you have one simple sentence that's quite short and it creates tension. So that's a very effective use of sentences. And for punctuation, we've already mentioned here, we've got semicolons and colons as well, lots of commas in these complex sentences. So that is really what we're aiming for in our writing, is to use all of those things in each of our paragraphs. So today we're really looking at how to show the reader details in our descriptions through a variety of sentences. Why are we doing this? Well, for English Language Paper 1, Section B, which is the writing section, you could be given a task to describe an image, and you will be marked, on whatever task you write a response to how well you can vary and craft your sentences. So there's specific bullet points on the mark scheme linked to that we're going to go through. How are we going to be doing this? Well, we'll be looking at a variety of sentence types and learning how to use them effectively in our own descriptive writing. So we'll just have a look at the mark scheme. I've pulled out the bullet points linked to each grade that go along with the way you use sentences and the way you describe things and show and don't tell. So up here at the top for level 3 and 4, which links to grades 4 and above, it says that your communication needs to be consistently clear, and for the higher grades, convincing and compelling. So that comes through in the way you write your sentences. Can you describe things clearly for the reader? Can you add lots of detail and build in meaning and tension through the sentences that you craft? Also, it says here for grades 4 to 6, use a variety of sentence forms for effect. That means different sentence types. And for effect means you don't just use the same type, you think about which one would be the most effective. And for the higher grades, you use the full range of sentence forms and you're always considering the effect. So that's really what we're looking at how to do this lesson. So just to start off, showing versus telling. When you're describing a scene, you need to really think about showing your reader rather than just telling them things, revealing things slowly to them. So have a look at the description in each box below. which one is showing and which one is telling, and think about what is the difference between showing and telling in a piece of writing. So I'll give you a little bit of time to read those two examples. Think about what the difference is between the description here and the description here. Okay, hopefully you've picked up on the fact that example A is obviously telling, and example B is showing. So in example A, it's very basic. The sentences aren't very complex. It's just telling us what's in the scene. The rocks are dark and gray. And although those are adjectives, it's not really bringing the details to life for the reader at all. There was ash coming out of them and the rocks, and they were horrible. It doesn't show us that they're horrible. It just tells us that they're horrible. Whereas in this example, we have so many details that show that the rocks are horrible, and they make the reader come to that realization rather than just telling them. So we've got gasping pools choked with ash, vomiting filth of their entrails. It's all very, very descriptive, and if you notice, they've used very complex sentences here to add as much description as they can to show the reader this disgusting scenery. So that, again, is what we're really aiming for. So for our first task, we are going to look at simple sentences. So I'm sure you all know what a simple sentence is, but we're just going to look at how they can be used effectively. So short, simple sentences can be used for effect to create tension in creative writing. However, too many simple sentences, if that's the only sentence type you use, they can pull your grade down. So a mixture, or think about when they'd be most appropriate, is really what you're looking for. So for task one, we need to spend a couple minutes to look carefully at the two examples below. And for A and B, which one do you prefer? And write a sentence explaining why. So which one, number 1 or 2 for A and number 1 or 2 for B? Which sentence do you think is the most effective for that writing, and why? And for a challenge, out of all the sentences above, which one do you think is the most effective? What impact does it have on the reader? Okay, so pause the video. Obviously, I'm not leaving full time for you to do each task in this. You can pause and do each task as we go along. So for A, I think that this probably comes from a story, and I personally feel that actually number 1 is the most effective. Those short, simple sentences have a pretty clear effect in that they're creating that tension and showing that this character is coming to a really shocking realization that they've met this murderer. So in a story, obviously these short sentences can be used back to back for moments of tension, and it works really well. For B, it seems like more of a description. So number 1, just using those short sentences just makes it sound really basic and not detailed at all. Whereas in sentence, the second example with these sentences here, they're very long and complex, and they've packed in as many adjectives and verbs and different powerful vocabulary choices to describe the scene as possible. And they've also used a range of punctuation. So for description, obviously add in a simple sentence every now and then to add in tension, but these long complex sentences will really help you add in as much detail as possible. Okay, so the next important thing to remember when you're writing sentences for a description is to vary the way you open them. So I've made a clear point up here by saying it is important to change the way you start your sentences. It can get really boring if you don't, and it is really repetitive and can make it seem like you don't know what to write. You can see that I've started every sentence with it, and it gets pretty boring, and it also makes it look as if I haven't really considered or thought about adding detail to my writing. So for task 2, I have 3 different techniques for varying and changing the way you open your sentences. The first one is to use a preposition, so that's linked to where things are in the scene with words like beyond, above, below, beside, in, close by. Um, and you can start sentences using those just to show where an object or person or aspect of the scene is placed. And that's really useful when describing a picture because, there will be things up above when you're describing the sky, and then there'll be things down below when you're describing what's happening on the ground. The other really easy technique to use is to use an adverb, which is just an ly word in this case. So it says cautiously, a mouse emerged from the shadows. Instead of just writing a mouse emerged from the shadows, that cautiously, suddenly makes it seem as if this writer knows what they're doing. And then lastly, you can use a verb and add an ing to the end of that. So trembling, the girl raised her hood up against the freezing rain. It just adds that extra bit of detail to, especially when you're including a character in your scene, to describe exactly what's going on with the character or an object or an animal. So what I'd like you to do is to look at these 3 sentences on the right, and I want you to rewrite each one of these 3 sentences on the right using a technique from over here, and try to use, one of each technique to practice how you do it. For the challenge, obviously write your own examples as well once you've done the task. Just use your imagination and try to come up with it on your own. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. Okay, obviously pause the video to make sure you've rewritten each one of these 3 sentences and used each one of these techniques. And well done if you completed the challenge. So for task 3, the last technique for sentences we're going to be looking at today to help you show your reader what's going on in your scene rather than just tell them is using repetitive structures. So using sentences with repetition or repetitive structures and patterns shows off your writing skills and helps to build tension and layers of detail for the reader. So below, we have 3 techniques for adding a bit of repetition within a sentence for effect. And these types of sentences really, really show off your writing skills to the examiner. It's not just your typical simple sentence or complex sentence. This shows that you can really craft a sentence. And use a range of punctuation as well. So first sentence is a list of 3 sentences. So the room was full, and then I have a colon here, full of strangers, full of tasteless music, and full of incessant chatter. So that just really, instead of just saying the room was full or the room was busy or the room was crowded, it just builds that detail up and does create that tension. So it moves from strangers to tasteless music to incessant chatter, and really just strings out the description for the reader. Our second type of repetitive sentence is a so-so sentence. So here's an example. There was one star in the distance, so small, so faint that it was barely visible. And again, that just adds extra adjectives there, using that repetition of so to build, the image of this star for the reader. And the last repetitive structure for a sentence is the no-no sentence. So the grey room seemed devoid of all life. There was no love, no joy, no human emotion. So you'll recognize that sentence from our Do It Now paragraph. And that just, again, helps show that you can use a colon, and it kind of forces you to use that varied punctuation, and links to these abstract nouns or feelings where you're putting, what is lacking from the scene. So what I'd like you to do for this task is to write an example of each type of structure. Now, I have included kind of an empty frame for you to use if you find this quite difficult. So this one over here does empty instead of full, and here it just gives you a topic of a mountain and then the street. So do those. If you'd rather just look at the 3 techniques and write your own 3 examples, that is fine. But if you find this a bit intimidating, you can use these structures over here, but you need to write an example of each type. So 1, 2, and 3. For the challenge, create a repetitive structure of your own and write an example of it. So there are other structures that you can create and use beyond so, so, and no, no, and list of 3. So be imaginative, be creative, and create your own. So I'll give you some time to write your sentences. Okay, obviously pause the video if you need time. Make sure you've written all 3, one of each type. And now we're going to move on to our final task. So for task 4, I want you to describe the scene in the image below. It's quite a lovely, peaceful, natural setting, although there are hints of something darker in the red, almost a fire-like sunset. So you could pull on that with using a few devices. When you describe this scene, I'm giving you a bit of guidance in the form of bronze, silver, and gold. So for bronze, if you're aiming for the bare minimum, the grade 4, and you're finding creative writing a bit intimidating, or it's something that you're not quite used to or confident doing, you're going to write at least 1 paragraph describing the sky and weather in the scene. Most of the picture is taken up with the sky and the weather. So what you need to do to achieve a grade 4 at the bare minimum in your paragraph is to begin your sentences in a variety of ways. And add 1 short, simple sentence for effect. So make sure you've got the variety in there. For silver, definitely write 2 paragraphs, 1 describing the sky and weather, and then another describing an object or objects. So we're trying to practice following that structure that we learned about in lesson 1. So in your 2 paragraphs, vary the way you begin your sentences. You can go back in the video and look at varied ways you can begin your sentences, with adverbs, verbs, and all kinds of different things like prepositions. You're going to mix long and short sentences for effect in a purposeful way, and you're going to include at least 1 sentence using a pattern of repetition. So you're trying to use all 3 sentence types and techniques that we've looked at today for grade 5 or 6. And for gold, grade 7 or plus, you're going to do all of the things for silver, all the things that you need to do for grade 5 or 6, but you're also going to really think about the punctuation that you use. So in your complex sentences, you will use punctuation marks like semicolons and colons, as well as your common commas and full stops. So spend a good period of time writing your paragraphs. Make sure you really think about the details that you're putting in. Remember, you can imagine and add ideas into the scene, and just use that image there as a jumping off point. So obviously pause the video to do this before moving on to the next task. And these will be the paragraphs that you're sending to your English teacher at the end of the lesson. Okay, so well done for finishing your paragraphs. I just have a self-assessment checklist here for you to go through with just a yes or no, because I don't know whether you're typing your work or handwriting it, so it's kind of hard to pick things out and underline them or highlight them. So what I'd like you to do is, as we go through each statement, I just want you to write for number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, yes or no. And then you get an idea of what you're doing well or what you're confident with and what maybe you need to think about and remember next time in your writing. So for number 1, I have described a wide range of details linked to the image and included 5 or more sentences in each paragraph. So hopefully all of you have a yes for that. I've put that kind of in our bronze category. You don't want to have really scrawny small paragraphs. If you're going to add a really short paragraph for effect, that's fine, but in your main paragraphs of your description, a minimum of 5 sentences is expected. Okay, number 2, I have started my sentences in different ways. They don't all start with the or it. So hopefully you've put a yes for that one. Number 3, this is where you're starting to push out of just your lower grades. So I have included at least one short, simple sentence for effect in my paragraph, yes or no. Then number 4, I have used a pattern of repetition in one of my sentences, yes or no. And then 5, I've used a wide range of punctuation beyond full stops and commas. I've used a semicolon or colon as well. So hopefully you may have done that when you used a pattern of repetition. But that 5th one is about how you create your complex sentences. Can you go beyond just using commas? So yes or no for these questions here. And please email your work for today to your English teacher so that we can see you're completing your work and just check how you're doing and give you some feedback on how your writing's coming along.